Good morning, everyone. Glad you're here, and I hope you're having a fantastic summer. I am. We set up a pool in the backyard, and all the kids are loving it. In fact, we found out Ariel is just a little fish. She probably spent 4 hours total in the, she just keeps running in little circles in the pool. And all my kids are half Filipino, half white, but they look full Filipino now, with the exception of Ariel, who's more fair-skinned and actually got a slight sunburn, and Christine's just shocked. Can't believe it. I think she's sunburned, and I was like, yeah, that happens when you sit in the pool for 4 hours. So having a great summer, really looking forward to it. Just have a couple things that I'd like to draw your attention to. Maybe the most important one spiritually is that we're going to be having baptisms. As of right now, between 7 and 10 people have signed up, some kids, some adults. And I wanted to talk about something I haven't talked about yet, and one of the reasons that we're handing out this chapter on baptism by Wayne Grudem from his Systematic Theology in General. I've read most of the chapters of this book, and the elders agree with it. He's a fantastic teacher, and what he does is just take you through biblical verses on baptism. He gives you his interpretation. He'll sometimes argue with interpretations he doesn't think is right. He'll tell you which interpretations are generally acceptable to differ on, which ones aren't. It's an incredible teacher and great guide on this. But one of the reasons we're handing this out is we actually have a couple people that are being baptized as adults who were actually baptized as infants. And I say baptized as infants. One of the arguments that Wayne Grudem makes that I agree with is that baptism is believer's baptism, which means we baptize people who have a believable profession of faith. When I took Isaiah through this when he was 9, I thought this is a little dense to go through with kids. Maybe I'll find some better resources. If you're wanting to have your kids baptized, we do have distilled resources for them that I can send you via email, and a couple questions that I would like to ask them either in person or on a Zoom call just to see what they believe. In general, we trust the parents. If you think your child is ready, we'll baptize your child kind of thing. But we just think it's good to actually talk to them about it. But regarding infant baptism versus believer's baptism, I took Isaiah through this, and Wayne Grudem talks about it. And one thing that Isaiah said is, Dad, in the Bible, it says that you get baptized once you believe. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, how would anybody ever know if a baby believed or not? And I said, that's exactly the thing. You're getting it. We don't know that. And so what I think infant baptism really is baby dedication. And I don't mean to be slamming infant Baptists. I believe there are pastors who baptize infants that are generally trustworthy and that is an interpretational issue. But I think really what's happening is that the parents are dedicating themselves to raise that child in the faith. That child has no idea they're being baptized, and there's no evidence in Scripture that we should baptize children whatsoever. And so we baptize adults, and we will baptize children that have a believable profession of faith, and we'll sometimes go younger. There's no necessary reason to say 12, although my parents chose 12 for multiple wisdom reasons. For one, you're old enough to understand at that point, and you remember things around that age. I remember my baptism. I remember what it looked like in the church in Germany. I remember the tub. I remember the things I committed to. If they're so young that maybe they're a child that really understands things, but they're so young that they might not remember it, you might consider waiting just for that reason. But I think that's somewhat up to the parents and up to the child's level of understanding about that. So one thing I did want to say is if you have been baptized as an infant or dedicated as an infant, even though it was called baptism, you should read this to see and make up your mind about what you believe baptism is. We have people in this church that have read this and decided, you know what, we agree that it's believer's baptism and we ought to be baptized for the first time as adults. There's great blessing in that obedience. I know it might be a little bit awkward, like going to college when you're 50 or something like that, but at the end of the day, I don't think it ought to be. It's awkward because so many young people go to college at that time, but we ought to be students all our lives, and we ought to just do whatever the Scriptures say, and I think there'll be great blessing in that. So that's my little spiel on baptism. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to your welcome cards. If you're new, if you need prayer, if you want to connect in some way, let us know on those welcome cards. Turn them in. If you're brand new, we've got I think a Dutch Brothers gift card for you. Also, this chapter is, we've got it printed out a bunch of times. You know, we have limited use rights on things like this, and it's on the connection table, so you can take one if you'd like to. Pig roast is always the very first Saturday of the of the year, and baptism starts around 11:30. A first Saturday of August every year, so you can know to plan ahead. I don't even remember what I said, but sometimes I black out, and then I just... So if you don't listen to everything I say, I'm not listening to everything I say either. But I don't know, I didn't ask the AV team to put this up, but if you could put the slide up about the pie contest. This is new for us this year. Their Buellers are running it. I'm a judge, and I'm learning all about not taking bribes. And so, but I will say, if you have like comments or concerns the day of, just write them on the back of like a $20 bill and hand them to me. We care about your concerns. So regarding the pie eating contest, we have multiple categories: fruit, cream, chocolate, and youth. Since we don't have a youth ministry, we decided we'll just eat them. So, yeah. Cannibalism jokes in church are probably not appropriate, so apologize for that. But no, it's just youth making pies, obviously. You can enter in any one of these categories, and if you want more information, like you probably can't memorize all this information, you could talk to Christina Bueller about it. I'm excited. It's not a pie eating contest, it's a pie making contest. I asked for a pie eating contest, so maybe we'll do both one of these days. But I'm excited about it. Should be great fun, and it feels like just the right thing to do at a pig roast. So with all those things said now, I don't think there's any other significant announcements. Let's pray, and we're going to get right into Proverbs 10. And you're going to want your Bible open for this, even though we have it on the screen. I think it's powerful to know where these wisdom sayings are in your Bible. So let me pray, and we'll get right into it. Heavenly Father, thank you for this Sunday. Thank you for this church and these people and the way that you've drawn us together in unity around the belief, Lord, and the certainty that you died for our sin and were resurrected for our eternal life. And we believe that. And we want to be faithful to support others who are making that profession for the first time, or just following the obedience of being baptized this summer. We pray that you would draw more people into that. We really think it's a powerful witness to neighbors and people that maybe have no connection to church and have not yet heard the gospel. Regarding these Proverbs, Lord, your wisdom is so powerful when applied in the right context, at the right time, in the right way, and we need your Spirit to do that. And so I pray that you would help me to get out of the way, and that people would listen to what you're saying through the words that I say from your word, and know how to apply them, and not just know that, but actually have the power by your Spirit to apply them in a way that transforms their souls and hearts. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So I've got something that I want to talk about that's a little bit different than normal introductions to sermons. Proverbs is a brand new genre. It's not entirely brand new to me, but I have actually never preached through Proverbs proper. That's what the scholarly term for chapter 10 to the end of, most way through the end of Proverbs is. Chapter 1 through 9 had themes. And so they were organized according to themes. Adultery was one of them. And so everything that the Proverbs are talking about in that chapter is about the dangers, the destructive patterns, the pathways into adultery or some kind of impurity like that. And there were other themes as well. However, chapter 10 is very difficult to determine a theme. You're going to see that. I'm going to read through it so you can try to think of, is there a central theme? I think there's about 3, maybe 4 themes. But I'm not sure that Proverbs works the way Romans or Timothy or even narrative and Genesis works. I think what the Proverbs are not random, but seemingly random, collected or procured wisdom sayings that Solomon learned experientially and learned from the Lord. And we don't have to find necessarily a cohesive theme. There are scholars that believe there are, but I feel like it has to be forced into that theme. You're going to see there are several themes, and these repeat over and over and over again in the Proverbs. And so I want to point your attention to something, just jumping into Proverbs 10 here real quick before we read it, and it's Proverbs 10, verse 2. And I think if you've ever read the Proverbs, you've experienced this feeling, and sometimes you experience it in other scriptures as well. Let me read it. Proverbs 10, verse 2. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. And you can say, yeah, absolutely. That's true. But if you're looking at it and trying to make sense of it, you'd think treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. Well, in one part of the sentence, we're talking about not gaining profit by doing evil things. And the other one is righteousness delivers from death. And they don't really feel congruent entirely, do they? And so you read it and you're like, well, it would have made more sense if it said treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but treasures gained by righteousness are eternal. You'd be like, that feels good. That feels like a balanced statement. The first statement makes sense with the second statement. And I was laboring over this idea because if there's something incongruent in a passage in my heart and mind, I want to figure out why. I want to make sense of it. And I started realizing there's something that we don't know, and there's something that God has not told us in the Proverbs, and that is the context and experience that Solomon had that made him write this and learn this wisdom saying. Okay, so context is unbelievably important, and yet we don't actually know the context. So I'm going to make up a context to make a point. I'm making it up. There's no proof of this in the Bible, but I'd like to make up a context that is not necessarily like the reason he wrote this proverb, but it's a likely thing Solomon might have experienced as a king. And if you think of this proverb having been written into that context, you're going to understand something about how to read the Proverbs in the first place that it has just totally transformed my way of reading the Proverbs. So again, treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. We talked about, as a joke, not taking bribes for a pie making contest, but imagine some really wealthy, powerful merchants. We have them today. We have guys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. By the way, I'm pretty sure, and I think this is real, that Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are going to fight in a cage match. Have you heard this? Just gets weirder and weirder out there, doesn't it? But yeah, I'm definitely on Elon's side on that case. But so you have these really rich men, and they have power because of their money. And you can justify doing bribes in ways that hide it from illegality, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of money exchanging hands for influence reasons in our world. And I think of the Supreme Court and how often they have probably been bribed in some way or another, or wined and dined to make a certain choice. And I pray for them to make the righteous choice, because when the elders or Supreme Court rulers and judges of the land are bribable, then, wickedness prevails. And so I was thinking about this in terms of Solomon. Almost assuredly, someone would have tried to bribe him at some point. Some wealthy merchant that maybe wanted to have land, and subdividing the land was actually illegal in Israel because the land was supposed to stay within the it's a huge part of the inheritance of each tribe, and so if you're selling off land to different people, it just dilutes it and people don't keep their inheritance. And so you could have seen how merchants were trying to get around some of those boundaries, and they're maybe trying to bribe Solomon. Again, I'm just making it up to make a point. But what happens when evil merchants don't get their way with the bribe? Well, historically, one of their options is to send a skilled assassin to just kill the king. Get the problem person out of the way. Assassinations, they happen today. There's never been a time in history where assassinations weren't one of the vehicles of evil people to get their way in the world. So imagine if Solomon was being offered a bribe by one of these wealthy merchants, and he knows that they have a reputation of sending skilled assassins after people. It's hard to prove because they're smart, but maybe that's it. And now think about him facing that, and he faced it the right way, and he learned something, and it's Proverbs 2, treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. So he decided to go against the bribe and say no. They sent the assassin against him, and God delivered him in some special way, right? We don't know if that actually happened, but here's the point. If it was something like that, all of a sudden the proverb makes total sense. You're like, well, no doubt he wrote it that way because he experienced being bribed and then being threatened with assassination. So he's saying treasures gained by wickedness do not profit. It's not worth it. They'll own me at the end of the day. I will no longer be king. They will. It's not a profitable business to take bribes, but righteousness delivers from death. And so he's not afraid of the assassination. Okay, so let's put that context aside, and maybe don't even remember it because it's not proven in Scripture that happened. But I think this is the way the Proverbs worked and how they were written. And it's very interesting that God did not tell us the context, because now we can take any one of these Proverbs and apply them to whatever context we're in. And here's what I want to tell you about that. Some of these Proverbs will be so specific to your life right now. They just fit the context. It doesn't matter if they have two incongruent ideas, because those ideas just fit like a puzzle piece or like Tetris perfectly into the wisdom that you needed in that moment. It's like, bing, I know what to do, okay? Other Proverbs, there's no way to apply them because your context has nothing to do with them right now. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to do two different things. One, slot into that Tetris piece and cross the line out, and that's applying that wisdom. This works. I'll tell you one in a moment that was like literally live time, real time applicable for me. And it's verse 1. But the other side is you store these pieces. Okay, well, I can't use that Tetris piece, and in this game of wisdom, you can just store them over here. And so you're storing up wisdom. And even if you don't memorize it, what the Spirit will do is help you recall that proverb, either in paraphrase or sometimes even word for word, to fit it in that place later. So instead of being like, I don't get that, that's frustrating, it knocks you out of wanting to read because you don't feel like you're understanding, you don't have to understand. You are not yet in the context for that wisdom saying to come alive. I think that's another reason why these are loosely procured different kinds of wisdom sayings that don't necessarily have to have a cohesive theme throughout the chapter. Think of this as like a shotgun blast of wisdom. And yet within that shotgun blast, there's little sniper bullets that if your context connects, it's like bam, straight to the heart, straight to the mind. You're like, whoa, that's for me. But it's not necessarily for everyone in every single situation. Sometimes God's just saying, learn this. It's for later. Other times it's like, this is for right now, and now you get it. So do you understand that point? This will really help you reading through the Proverbs. It's helped me. You don't necessarily have to try to force a main point out of here. You don't have to get it. Just noted. It's not worth gaining money through wicked means, and righteousness delivers from death. Who knows when that will apply specifically to me, but it will someday. And if you don't have it stored, you won't have it ready. Right? That's the way God's word works. You want to store up. You want the word of Christ to dwell in you richly. So let me tell you a time here, unlike this first hypothetical of what it might have been like for the context of Solomon, where the Proverbs applied immediately. And this was supernatural. I'm not even saying this as an example of how you ought to do it. And I'm telling you, every single word of what I'm about to tell you is not exaggerated. It's exactly how it happened. And these experiences are not all that common for me. So we were living in Mountain Park in Del Prado. And we have had a little nook that's the dining room, and the kitchen's right next to it. And I still remember Edna, which was my mom's white-haired mentor who lived in Iowa, had come over for dinner. She'd flown all the way from Iowa over, and it was a big deal. She was probably my mom's closest friend, but also a real mentor through thick and through thin. And she was there, and so of course we're talking about the Bible, talking about theology, talking about things. And I start getting into an argument with my dad about something. And I don't remember what the argument was about, but I remember at the time feeling like the way he was arguing or what he was saying wasn't fair or right, and I was getting really frustrated. And I allowed myself to get to the point where I just popped off to him. I said something I ought not to say. And Edna, who is just the nicest, warmest, sweet little lady, turned into that Texas grandma with a shotgun on the porch. And it's like, young man, you do not speak to your father like that. Right? And she had done nothing. I'm not upset at her. And this is a house guest. And I, respect women, respect the elderly, respect elderly women, especially when hospitality, I'm like, I can't say anything to her. I'm so angry at my dad. I just decided get up and go upstairs and retreat because I didn't know what to do. And this was post-college. I was a young man, but I wasn't that young. This was early 20s kind of thing, maybe mid-20s. And I had come to faith, though, dramatic change in my life, and I was submitted to God's word. I knew she was right, that I shouldn't talk to my dad like that no matter what he said. It's dishonoring to my dad. And I was just frustrated, and now I'm embarrassed because I'm like, how am I going to get out of this situation? Am I just going to stay upstairs till she leaves, Like I just stomped off in tantrum style, and now I'm upstairs. I'm like, I got to get back downstairs, and I don't know what to do. And randomly, I remembered this story. I don't know if you've heard of the Dutch Flat Church, but this is a church in the Silverton area and kind of a denomination. And they're pretty legalistic. It's a kind of sectarian type of church. It's the kind of church that believes that you can only be saved if you're Dutch flat. They do strange things, like they preach all in German. And I was like, did you understand it? He goes, some of it. My dad grew up in this church. So just some strange ways. And what they would do, based on a passage where Jesus says, don't meditate on what to say. And it's about when you're placed before governors and kings, to trust the Holy Spirit that he'll give you the words to say. It doesn't have anything to not do with not preparing a sermon, but they applied it that way. And so what they would do, and he said they were actually pretty great preachers. They really knew God's word well. They would open the Bible randomly, or I hope at least it was randomly, otherwise it's a lie, and they would point their finger, and then whatever verse it was on, they would preach on that. And he said they actually did a decent job on that, right? And so I was angry. I know that's kind of a foolish thing to do, and so I just did it. Opened my Bible up, and I'm like, God, tell me what I should do. Point my finger, and it's Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. It actually happened. I just laughed, and I was like, that's my way out. I'm just going to go out. I'm going to say, this is what happened. This is supernatural. I didn't even feel embarrassed anymore. I was like happy that God was that direct with me. It's like, I'm an idiot. And I went downstairs and apologized to them. And Edna was beaming. No longer that Texas grandma, back to the sweet grandma, but she was just like, wow, in a strange way, I think I had increased in her mind in terms of her respect for me. And even though I didn't deserve it at all, I'd just been totally rude in front of her to my dad. But this is how the Proverbs work. I could have read that 100 times while being a decent son. A wise son makes a glad father. I'm like, yeah, sure. But a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. Yeah, I get it. Although, isn't he also a sorrow to his father? And doesn't he also make his mother glad? I've just been like, But I saw my mom's face. This is her mentor. And her son is acting like a fool right in front of her. She just put her head down like this, So, and it did not make my dad glad the way I was popping off to him. And it was unwise. It was just so specific. This is the way the Proverbs work. But you can't just be in them in the summer. You can't just randomly point your finger at something. That's not really the way the word works. We're to study it daily. So you might actually include a chapter of Proverbs with your Bible reading with regularity. And you're going to start experiencing these powerful times where it's just like, bam, 4 lines gone, and the problem's fixed. I was stuck. I don't know what to do. I'm embarrassed to go downstairs. I know I was wrong, but I'm still upset with my dad. And God just unlocked it for me in that way. So what I'm trying not to do when I go through these verses is just give you an audio commentary. So Bible commentaries are, they'll say verse 2 and then a paragraph about that. At the same time, there isn't necessarily a cohesive theme that I can say this is exactly what Solomon was talking about here. I think there's a couple of themes. I'd like to tell you a couple of these themes and show you the verses that are represented in them. But even that is somewhat of a leaky bucket because there's sometimes more than one theme in one verse. But the results of diligence and laziness and them leading to wealth and poverty, those are the results. You'll find that in verse 3, 4, 5, 15, 16, 22, and 26. The results of loving versus hateful speech. This one has a bunch of verses in it, 6, 10, 11, 13, 14, 18, 19, 20, 21, 31, 32, all the way throughout. In fact, if I said if you were going to pick one main theme, it would be wisdom around how to talk, words, speech, that kind of thing, and what is righteous and what is wicked and the results thereof. And then lastly, I put as a category the results of integrity and humility versus dishonesty and pride. And that's a big category too, 9, 13, 14, 17, 24, 25, 27, 29, and 30. But I found a verse, and it's verse 12, that's repeated, at least in paraphrase by Jesus, and is stated specifically by Peter in 1 Peter, I think it's 4:18 or something like that. And it says, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers over all offenses. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. And I realized that if you were Adam and Eve before the fall, meaning you didn't have a flesh, you didn't have two completely opposed competing desires, the desires of your new self, aligned with the Spirit, empowered by the Spirit, and desires of your fallen self, your flesh. These are selfish, they're lazy, they only always do things to protect number one, and these are unselfish, they're selfless, they're giving, they're faithful, they're trusting, and they're good, and these are at odds with one another. We saw that in Galatians, I think, last week. If you didn't have that flesh, I don't think these would be anywhere near as difficult to understand, nor would they be difficult to apply. I don't think that Adam and Eve, or in this case Jesus, who also wasn't battling his own flesh because he was perfect, although he did battle temptation, had a difficult time applying this. He didn't have to hear them over and over again. But because we have this disease, the sin disease in the flesh, similar to how chemo works, we have to keep beating it back. In fact, Romans says that we ought to put to death the misdeeds of the body by the Spirit. So the Spirit has the fancy theological word is called mortification. We're killing off our flesh. And let's say if you've gone through a season where you've basically been nurturing the flesh back to life, it comes back to life and then it battles powerfully again. You can beat it back. I heard a mentor one time say that let sleeping lions lie, or let sleeping lions dog. Like, don't prod a sleeping lion. And he was talking about lust in this case. If you just keep putting it out of your mind, keep beating it, keep winning, keep putting it to death by the Spirit, that fleshly desire that's evil, that's impure, it's a sleeping lion, right? You have to wake it back up. It actually goes to sleep. And there have been whole seasons of my life where lust has not even been a temptation that enters my mind. But if you wake it up, all of a sudden lust is fully awake with fangs, and angry and powerful, and it begins to destroy. So you consider that as we're going through the Proverbs, you consider the idea that lost my train of thought here for a second. Thinking of lions, and hopefully you didn't lose your train of thought. I'm gonna gather it. But if you think, love covers a multitude of sins. If you think of love from a perfect nature, even though you don't have it, you would know exactly how to apply each one of these, and you wouldn't be struggling to apply them. You would have the power because there's no resistance in your spirit. And so in a way, love unlocks all this wisdom to you. It unlocks not only understanding the wisdom, but it unlocks the power to do it. So no matter what the wisdom is, and this is also not just true for Proverbs 10, you know that wicked people are unloving, that it's unloving to be lazy, that it's unloving to speak in a hateful manner, obviously. That it's unloving to do the wrong thing and gain from it. Because when you're seeking treasures wickedly, you're always harming someone else. It's not a world where if you get rich doing evil things, no one gets hurt. Someone's losing money. Nothing is for free. So, which is not the case necessarily with generating your own wealth by righteous means. In that case, you're not necessarily taking, but you're actually providing for people, jobs and opportunities and things like that. And you can see how merchants of our world do that exact thing. I was thinking about the pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not really prone to conspiracies, but I really believe that the pharmaceutical companies, it's been clearly shown, especially through everything that's gone on with COVID, that they're just lining their pockets. I don't think they could care any less about our actual health. And to be honest, if I wasn't a Christian, I would probably do the same thing. Was faced with, I can make billions, some people get hurt, maybe not. Probably justify it in my mind. It's like, this is actually a solution for them. I believe in this product, even though it's not tested. This, it's a vacation property in Maui, another one in some ski resort at Whistler. It's just so much money. You can see how people are doing these very things, and it's unloving. But oftentimes, it's unloving to a nameless, faceless person you don't know. And so it's not just a personal thing between you and someone else. It's something that harms someone that you don't even know, and so it feels easier to do. The enemy tempts you more easily to do this wicked thing. So you need to consider that. You need to consider the fact that love is the key to all wisdom. Because speech is such a prevalent theme, I would say that if you remember anything else today, this might not be the thing that the Holy Spirit's applying you today. The main point from other passages, I'm confident it is. But here, I'm not confident that this is the main point. It's one of the main points, and that is that love unlocks wise speech, or love is the key to wise speech. If your wife just said something to you that really hurt your feelings and pushed on a button, if you actually are really loving her by the power of the Spirit in that moment, you'll know exactly how to respond. Usually, I get like a multiple choice test. Respond this way or respond this way. I know which one's wrong, and it's whether or not my flesh or my spirit wins, or the Spirit wins in this case, and which one I say. And the one always is works amazing. Have you ever said anything mean-spirited to someone and then they come back with kindness and you're just like, totally dissolves your frustration towards them? Or they come back with harsh words right back at you, and you oil on the fire, you're right in a fight. Okay, so love is the key to wise speech. and you're going to find out that he's showing us the results of being hateful regarding speech and hateful regarding, or loving regarding speech in multiple of these. But there's also other themes like laziness and diligence and wealth and poverty and integrity and humility versus dishonesty and pride. So I don't know which one of those categories the Spirit's going to be highlighting to you, but I thought I would give you some structure to understand this with. So let's continue in verse 3, because we talked about 1 and 2 quite a bit. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. Maybe another thing to understand about the Proverbs is that they are usually deeper than what you just take at face value, but they're definitely not any more shallow than that. So the Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but thwarts the craving of the wicked is definitely at least about food and you being provided for and getting the calories you need to have to sustain the energy you need for the day. It's not less than that, but I think it's definitely about more too. In fact, I think when he says craving of the wicked, you could have cravings for food, you could have cravings for all different kinds of things, and the flesh tries to satisfy itself with those cravings rather than by faith with God. So I think what we're talking about on a deeper level is that the Lord does not let the righteous go unsatisfied. The spiritual meaning of this, I think, is deeper than just the physical. However, it's not less. And so I want to talk about food for a moment. And the reality is that most of us are probably not going to see ourselves in the category of wicked. Is it true that we're depraved? Yes. But what that means is not necessarily that everyone has been as developed in their evil as they possibly could be. It's that apart from the grace of God, there's no end to how evil you can become. You will become the most evil version of yourself apart from the grace of God. And so since I believe that most of us have that grace of God living in our lives in an active way, I don't really believe that the majority of you have devolved into wickedness. So it's easy to be like, yeah, that's not for me because I'm not really in the wicked category. But sin is still evil and still leads to death. And therefore, when you look at this, you're going to see times where you have cravings for things. And if you've been nursing those cravings, if you've been feeding those appetites for those things, those grow. And you cannot expect the Lord to satisfy your desires and cravings for things that are of the flesh. In fact, you can expect the Lord to thwart them. So one of the insidious things about the flesh is that it tends to mask itself and justify that these things are okay for us to desire and to feed in that way. So sometimes you're not even aware that you've been operating the flesh in some area of desire. And then when you realize God is shutting every single door for you to get that, you start getting frustrated at him. And you haven't even realized that the reason he's doing it, A, is because he loves you and he opposes the evil thing that you're wanting. It's bad for you. It hurts other people. Because God is love, he will thwart the cravings of the wicked. And so it's not just for those who are fully developed in their wickedness, but I have experienced many times. I wanted to be an NFL D tackle, and I wanted to be a star D tackle. And I wanted to be that because I loved the glory you gain in front of the crowd. I loved the gladiator atmosphere. And God most definitely thwarted my plans. It was obvious he was against it, and I got upset at him for it. I thought he was always against me. I was against God. I was for myself. And that's not good. It's destructive. I wish I could take it back. It's one of the greater regrets of my life. And God's forgiven me for it and restored some of the years that the locust has eaten. But the idea here is you ought not to expect that God is going to give you every single desire of your heart. Those desires need to be surrendered to him in the first place. But that does not mean this like, oh, if you want every little thing that God wants, then you can only get what he wants. And it's like this life of near poverty and difficulty and struggle. The Lord is abundant. I literally asked the Lord, so I didn't have the money to have both a kitchen and a hot tub. And I have a lot of chronic injuries, so for me, a hot tub, it's still a luxury purchase, but it's really therapeutic. I feel a lot better. These injuries just kind of never go away, even with physical therapy, and heat just melts them away. I'll start my day in an amazing way. But then I also thought the wiser thing to do is to invest in a kitchen, because we were going to do a kitchen renovation, and that's the thing that makes your house more valuable. And also, hot tubs like the example that everyone, including Dave Ramsey, gives not to do with your money. So I'm like, but is it really that big of a deal to get both? You gave Solomon so much gold, and all you wanted from him is to wear justifying all this stuff. And anyways, I just prayed. It's like, God, if you want to give me both, give me both. And then we had, like, you've heard the whole story, like a multiple water loss, and a State Farm sponsored kitchen renovation. And I found a hot tub for a used hot tub, which is usually unadvisable to buy, but it was in perfect working order, and it was only $3,000, and I was able to get both. So you may think, well, it's still unwise purchase, but God made it possible to do both. He's an abundant God. And it wasn't a need of mine to have a new kitchen. It wasn't a need of mine to have a hot tub either. So I don't think of God as someone who will just give you barely the needs that you have. He will definitely meet your needs. That's what this is talking about. But man, when's the last time you've actually gone hungry for any other reason than poor planning? You know, I'm not saying there's people in America that aren't going hungry. There are, but children as well. But I haven't gone hungry except on purpose for the longest time. And the foods that we eat, it's like steak and we eat like kings. We eat like absolute kings. It's so far beyond just satisfying our hunger. And what's promised is that it'll meet our needs, but I have found God to be far more abundant than that. And so you don't need to believe the lies of the flesh that he's holding out on you. And that if you just did this other thing, you would be more satisfied. It's never the case. It's always diminishing returns. It's less satisfying. Now, this next verse is in the category of that, poverty and diligence and laziness and wealth. And it says, a slack hand causes poverty, but a hand of a diligent makes rich. I want us to remember that the key to all of this thing is love. Laziness is unloving. It's always unloving. First of all, it's unloving towards God because God has given you a life plan that's discoverable, a vocation that you ought to give yourself to. Work is cursed, but work itself is not evil, it's good, and he's given you a purpose. And when you just decide to be lazy with that, it's the opposite of glorifying the Lord. We are to work heartily as unto the Lord and not to men. And he will reward us for that. So laziness is something I think that we aren't necessarily, I think we're born with it. But I don't think we're born with this fully developed laziness. I think you have to develop laziness by choices. And it starts in childhood. And the main thing I want to say here is that in my experience, people that are adults, 20 to 30-year-olds and beyond, the concrete has settled, the paint has dried, and change comes a lot harder. In fact, I can't think of a single example of a person that I know that fits in the lazy or apathetic category that has changed that was an adult. It seems like this thing that just sticks with people through all their lives. Is it possible change? Absolutely, it is. But I think it's much more powerful to start when children are young and to teach them a good work ethic then. The paint hasn't dried, the concrete's still mixable. So don't shy away from having your kids do hard work. It develops their work ethic. They get to see the fruit of their labor. We don't have to do hard work like my grandfather forced his 8 boys or 7 boys to do, 9 kids altogether, where I remember that, forget what year it was, but we had white thick smoke in the suburbs from all the forest fires, and there was this advisory saying don't go out, you'll be in danger, and my dad was like, this is nothing. I couldn't see a foot in front of myself in the fescue fields, and we'd be out there for 12 hours at a time and I'm just fine. And so I was like, man, that's a rough that is a rough childhood to have. And as a teenager, on top of it, he had hay fever. So he's just sneezing the entire time, can barely breathe, smoke everywhere. Because of that, I thought, I don't know why anyone ever does farming. I respect farmers. It's probably one of the most intense work ethics that we have in our nation comes from these farmers and these agricultural. And Israel is very agricultural as well. So we're talking about a pretty intense work ethic that I think has been lost in America. Maybe not in the boomer generation, but definitely it's lessened in the millennial generation. I think it's up to parents to teach their kids to work hard, and that it's good to work hard, and that is really the key to wealth. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. If you want to know how to become wealthy, this is not the health and wealth gospel. Diligence is one of the keys. Hard work. It's not a get rich quick scheme. It's not some shortcut. It's just hard work over time. So that's your key right there. Continue to work hard, do that over time, and trust God to provide for you. So maybe the next time we come to a laziness and poverty verse, I'll go a little speedier, but that ought to be something you think about. Have you been apathetic? Have you been lazy? Have you slackened. God is benevolent, and so it's not an immediate effect that all of a sudden you're in poverty because one day of laziness. But don't cultivate a life of laziness, and don't shy away from having your children work hard. It teaches them while the paint hasn't dried yet. Verse 5, he who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. We're not as much of an agricultural culture in the suburbs. It's more of a service culture. And so the summer doesn't mean as much since we have heating and air conditioning as it did before, because there isn't necessarily a particular harvest. In fact, tax season is the season that this would apply to. Don't sleep in tax season. Work hard. No, it's tough, but you got to work hard in those moments. Or if you're, I was a personal trainer, and almost nobody ever buys personal training packages in the summer. It's usually in the winter or in January when people are renewing their yearly goals and things like that. But when you don't want to be sleeping when it's time to harvest, and you want to be ready for that. And again, I think it's about more than just being lazy and sleeping in. It's about being apathetic. Are you maybe in a season where you ought to be harvesting, but you're stuck in this pattern of laziness, and you're not actually reaping what God wants you to sow? Or you're not actually reaping what you've sowed. You're not reaping what God wanted you to reap. And so you have to be careful, because sometimes you don't know when that season of harvest is going to come. It's not always in the summer for us as a service industry, but you need to be ready. If as a salesperson, I know, there's like a pipeline, and you just keep putting leads in and calling, and sooner or later, someone will buy. There's sometimes dry seasons and sometimes seasons of great productivity. And if you just happen to be lazy during that time of productivity, you're not going to make it in the sales world. I know we have some salesmen in here that know that better than I do. So you got to be thinking about how unloving it is towards your family, towards God, to just decide to be lazy for a season. It might be the season where he wanted to bring the greatest blessing. It's not a loving way to live. Verse 6, blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Here's where we are getting into some of the teaching of wisdom about speech, and you're going to see it over and over again now. So the idea here, again, feels somewhat incongruent. And instead, because blessings are on the head of the righteous, that's not really about speech, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence, and you're like, I wouldn't naturally think those fit together, right? So instead of coming up with another make-believe potential hypothetical context, some of you probably have something that's going on in your life that you're like, that's so true. This is exactly what's happening in my life. So listen to that. Think of the context where this might apply. If the context doesn't really apply in your life, take it and put it in the storage bin for later. Don't just disregard it and say, I don't understand it. You don't have the context that unlocks it. That's all that's happening. And God didn't give it to you yet, and that's just fine. So moving on here. The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot. It's so true. I think one of the things that men towards the retirement age care about more than anything, and this is from experience talking to them in our church, is the idea that they would leave a lasting legacy, that people would remember them well. It's a very painful thing for a man who is retiring. It's kind of like the death of his career in a way, not sure what to do next, and looking kind of at like the long distant, not light at the end of the tunnel, but like death, and thinking, I didn't really leave a legacy. I don't know if people are going to speak of me well or not. You don't want that at the end of your life. And so the statement of fact that the memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot is very true. And it's also conciliatory, that's not the word, cathartic. It's satisfying to think about while the wicked are still alive and wreaking havoc on earth, to know that their memory will not be thought of well long term. That might not be the temporal win that you want right now, but it is a win long term, and we are to have those kind of long-term, long-game heavenly perspectives. So don't fret yourself because you see somebody that's doing evil things winning. Because right now it seems like evil is winning in America, but that is going to be remembered as a rot in our nation, not as something that is a blessing. Verse 8, the wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. Only a couple verses later, he repeats, and a babbling fool will come to ruin. And in verse 19, it says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. I don't think this is talking about primarily the difference between extroverts and introverts, because you may not be speaking when you ought to as an introvert, and you definitely may be speaking way too many words as an extrovert. I'm on the extroverted side. This was convicting to me. The reality is, it ought to be convicting to the person that talks too much, and it ought to be a upgrade in wisdom to those who are seeing people talking too much. It's a lack of self-control. I know that about myself. If the fruit of self-control was more developed in my life, I would be a better listener, which would be a great quality to have as a pastor. So I work on that. But we need to remember that when you see someone just babbling on and on, this is foolish behavior. So when it comes to your discernment, some of you have the gift of discernment. Some of you don't have that gift, but you're wanting to upgrade your discernment. When you see someone talking and talking and talking and talking, it ought to be a red flag. I wouldn't say you just have to dismiss them altogether. They may not have evil intent, but it's just foolish to not restrain your lips. And so we need to be careful about over-talking. In the same way, in this case almost an inverse, to me this makes sense, the wise of heart will receive commandments. So they're listening to what's being told them even when it's corrective, and yet the fools are just babbling on and on and on and on. So be careful about that. Sometimes it's best to just restrain your words and to listen and receive what you're hearing. Whoever talks in integrity will walk securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. If you're wondering, this really is sort of seemingly randomly connected sayings, this is the one in your mind you can fit into the idea of security. And we all need it. Our world, if you're operating in the flesh, you're not going to be secure. You are not going to be secure. You're going to be burdened in your conscience. You're going to, what is the world coming to? There's no peace. Security is a really powerful thing. And so integrity, not buying into lies, not lying yourself, being inwardly honest. Have you ever been arguing with someone and you know they just made a conversation argument winning point? And so all you have to do is twist it a little bit and it's not true in your heart, and you do it so that you can win the argument, because if they win the argument, something negative you think is going to happen in your life. They're going to get some kind of advantage, or you're going to have to change your behavior or do something like that. And both of you know you did it, but you're just insisting you didn't. Inward honesty is the kind of honesty where even when it hurts, you stay true to what the Holy Spirit is saying in your heart. And that's the kind of integrity we're talking about. It's not something anyone has naturally. It's not something. All Satan needs to do is offer you something that's greater than whatever commitment to integrity you have, and you're going to need the Holy Spirit to stay in that place of inward honesty. And it's a very unloving thing. I was going to say I have friends, but they're not really friends. There are people in my life, acquaintances, that I know are just inwardly dishonest, especially when push comes to shove. They'll say whatever needs to be said to get their way. And it's impossible to really have any kind of deep relationship with them because there isn't that honesty. I'm not connecting with the real person. I'm connecting with whoever they're putting forward as the real person, and it's a mirage. It's not real. How many masks do you need to take off when you're relating to people? How many masks do you put on to relate to people? If you have that security we're talking about, if you're secure in the Lord, you don't have to wear a mask. People can know who you are. You don't even have to hide some of the worst things about yourself because you're already forgiven in Christ. It makes me think, actually, that dishonesty is related to a brokenness when it comes to receiving God's grace. It's actually a legalism to some degree, dishonesty. You think you can't be honest about who you are because you think then you're going to be judged. God already knows. You couldn't hide it from him. What's the point of hiding it from other people? So integrity is it's foolish. It's that simple. Let me back up for a second, too, because we're going to get to these wisdom sayings that you're going to be like, well, that's not always exactly true. So God will say something. Aren't there people who are righteous who have gone hungry? Yeah, there are people that are righteous who have gone hungry. That's not the way that wisdom works. These, I would say, instead of saying, hey, these are always true, I would stop short of saying they're not always true, but instead say to yourself, this is always wise. To believe this is always wise. Even though sometimes our experience will have some friction with it, that's the way wisdom sayings work. The wise don't think that just because you live a righteous life, you will never hunger. Sometimes a righteous life leads to persecution, and you will be hungry because someone is withholding food from you in a prison cell. That was Paul's life. Was he unrighteous because he's hungry? No, that's not the case. But he would have never said, this isn't true, verse 3, the Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but thwarts the craving of the wicked. Instead of saying these apply to every single situation, saying these are always wise to believe in every single situation. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. Whoever winks the eye causes trouble, and a babbling fool will come to ruin. We've already talked about a babbling fool, but winking the eye in this case is trying to connect with someone else to show them that you're lying, or that what you just said is the opposite of what you're saying. I'm not saying that winking the eye is always wrong, but in this case, that's what that is. They're saying one thing to a person, and they're winking at this other person so that they know, hey, we're in cahoots against this. So there's trouble that causes. And I think we probably wink the eye more than we really actually realize. There's times where we say one thing to one person, and then another to another. And if they were both there at the same time, you'd be found out. And it causes a burdened conscience. We're going to be talking about a burdened conscience and what that's an omen of in just a minute. But it's just not worth it. Be the same person to everyone. Don't speak differently to one person than you do to another. That's like winking the eye. Verse 11, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. It is sometimes extremely difficult to discern between who has a good intention for you and who has an evil intention. And sometimes on the surface it seems completely opposite. In fact, I've learned this so many times the hard way that I tend to recoil when someone's way too nice with their words. If it's just syrupy sweet, I'm like, what are you hiding? Why are you so nice? The people I really trust are not that nice, right? The wounds of a friend are faithful. Sometimes the people that are really good in my life and wise in my life say things that hurt. And you're buttering me up. Flattery. When someone's flattering you like that, I'm not saying be suspicious all the time. I am saying, though, just be careful. Be careful in that case, because sometimes it's concealing violence. Even if it's not currently directed at you, there are often ulterior motives. In the same way, we ought to upgrade our view of our words. They're a fountain of life for the righteous. You have a responsibility to impact others and in encouragement in an upbuilding way with your words. So the difference between tearing people down and what you ought to be doing with your words is really great. It's really great. This is definitely not a rag on libertarianism, because I'm becoming more and more libertarian the longer I learn about it. But one of the standards of libertarianism, and since I'm still learning this, I might not be entirely complete in it, it's the idea of basically not doing any harm to anyone else. But God's standard is higher to that. He doesn't want us just not doing harm. He wants us doing good to other people. And so that's probably one of my beefs with libertarianism. I want a political theory that actually has laws that require good actions, not just stopping bad actions. But I'm not a political theorist or, versed in those areas, so I'm not even saying I know better than what we currently have. But the point here is that when you think of your words, you ought not to think of just like not doing much damage. You have a responsibility out of love to build people up with your words, and that takes the spirit again. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. You can just hear Peter saying love covers a multitude of sins. And if there was anywhere to find the cross, it's right here. Our example of love is not just being nice to people. It's not being a little bit sacrificial. It's laying down your life for somebody else. That's love. That's how Jesus defined it. And it's even beyond that. He laid down his righteousness for us. It's the great exchange. He lays down his righteousness. We gain it. He gets our sin and the responsibility for it, and he gets killed in a vicious and horrible way. So every single offense of yours, past, present, and future, is covered by the cross. This is so true in the cross and so deep in the cross that you can't help but see it here. On the lips of him who has understanding, wisdom is found, but the rod is for the back of him who lacks sense. I've been telling my kids that they asked, "Do you ever get spanked, Daddy?" And I said, "You have no idea." And it's so much worse than the consequences I give you. God's school of hard knocks is, a spanking or some kind of discipline is momentary. The pain is momentary. It goes away. If it's abusive, maybe not. And by the way, the law in Oregon is that if it leaves a mark, it's abusive. The law actually supports corporal punishment in Oregon. You need to know that because it actually talks about in the Bible to not spare the rod. And that you spoil children if you never give them consequences that actually hurt. And obviously that's controversial, but it's pretty amazing that it's still supported by law even in Oregon. A lawyer will support you in that, so you don't need to fear that. Maybe there'll come a time where we do need to fear that to some degree. But my point is this, that when it comes to the cross, the things that you have done, the things that you've left undone, the good actions that you haven't done, the bad actions that you have done, they're all covered in that cross. And love covers all offenses. If somebody has ever said something really mean to you, you respond with something kind, it's unbelievably powerful. You find a curmudgeon at Safeway, and they're, you're too close to me, whatever's going on, and you just smile at them, oftentimes it changes their whole countenance. It's the way of the cross. Moving on, verse 13, on the lips of him who has understanding, wisdom is found, but the rod is the back for him who lacks sense. I know we were just in that verse. The school of hard knocks is a lot worse. I think I've said this before, but in German, there's a phrase, they talk about children who are Kopf durch die Wand kids, head through the wall children. They only learn with pain. I was one of those kids. I have at least one of those kids. And you don't want to continue in that. That's so foolish to have to experience pain to learn wisdom. There's a way to learn it right now and avoid the pain in the first place. Verse 14, the wise lay up knowledge, but the mouth of the fool brings ruin near. I think we've talked quite a bit about the idea of how foolishness brings about speech that is ruinous. So I'm going to continue. Verse 15, a rich man's wealth is a strong city, and the poverty of the poor is their ruin. This is not a slam on the poor. Obviously, God loves the poor more than we do. And this is not saying that every single person who's rich is somehow right with God. It's just point blank true. I was listening to some reel, call it doom scrolling these days, where you just waste time scrolling. And I saw a Joe Rogan podcast, and I'm not endorsing Joe Rogan's podcast, but he was asked the question and immediately drew me in, does wealth bring happiness? And I thought this will be interesting. He's not a Christian. I wonder what he's going to say. He's going to say the wise thing. And I've always kind of thought the same thing he thought. He said, no, wealth does not bring happiness, but poverty definitely brings sadness. And I was like, that's wiser than I thought his answer was going to be. And he went on and he said, see, as soon as I became so wealthy that I didn't need help on anything anymore, there was a burden that was lifted off my shoulders. Anxiety was lessened. I'm able to pay for the things. But any money beyond what meets my needs has not led to any kind of happiness at all. It doesn't increase my happiness. In fact, it does the opposite he was talking about. It's like, this sounds like Ecclesiastes. I think that's kind of what Solomon is saying in this case, is that poverty is terrible. It's very difficult. Having no money to provide for yourself is a horrible situation. It's one of the reasons why we ought to help the poor in their physical needs. But a rich man's wealth is a strong city. There's just a lot of ways that you can, let's say you get unhealthy. I remember Magic Johnson just beat HIV. I think it had a lot to do with the amount of money that he had. You remember that? So you can buy your way out of some diseases. You can buy your way. Money is not necessarily an evil thing. And in the Jewish mind, in the Shrewd's mind, wealth is a good thing. This is not the health and wealth gospel. It's diligence not gained evilly. It's wealth not gained evilly. It's wealth gained through diligence. And there's strength in it. So just take that at face value. It's not a moral judgment on rich versus poor. The wage of the righteous leads to life, and the gain of the wicked leads to sin. If you give into your fleshly desire, you may gain something, but it'll just lead you into even more sin. That's the result of that. It's a vicious circle. Whoever heeds instruction on the path to life, whoever heeds instruction is on the path to life. He who rejects reproof leads others astray. It was not so much convicting, but it was just immediately jumped out to me on the page. And this one makes perfect sense, and it's not incongruent to me. It's the idea that if you listen to other people who are instructing you and even accept correction, you're on the path to life. But when you don't, your influence is to lead other people astray too. I've seen this so many times. One example would be when you're counseling people who are considering getting divorced. Both partners can find two different groups of people. One that have basically done it themselves or been through something else like it and living a compromised life, and they will always unfailingly say the same thing. Oh, just get rid of that bad partner. They will always tell them the unspiritual thing. And the other one, who has gone through some difficult stuff and knows how hard marriage can be at sometimes, and will still support the marriage and say, don't do it. Do not get divorced. We'll stand with God's word in how much he hates divorce, and how divorce really is a picture of hell. It really is. I think C.S. Lewis was right to compare divorce in a spiritual way to hell. So you can always find people that will tell you what you want to hear. There are people that follow what they want to hear as well. Don't be that person. And that means you're going to have to accept some painful correction at times. By the way, if you always bristle when people are correcting you, you're going to stop getting corrected. Nobody wants to constantly have someone be in a negative relationship with them just because they told them the truth about something. So it's costly not to ever be correctable. Verse 18, let me look at our time here. Yeah, we're nearing our end. Hopefully your attention span is still strong. I'm going to start skipping ones that, or not going through much time, giving much time to ones that have already been talked about thematically. The one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. I'll talk about the slander part. You are most tempted, every single time, most tempted to slander someone that's hurt you. So when you're hurt by someone, that is when you ought to be on most guard about slandering and gossip. Okay? We'll generally talk kindly about people that have been kind to us. You're not tempted to say, when's the last time you said something really mean-spirited about someone to someone else who you really love and have a great relationship to? I can't remember it happening in my life. It happens when you're frustrated and angry at someone. So when you're frustrated and angry at somebody, be vigilant. The enemy's coming, telling you to tell other people a bunch of negative things about them. And you know what? It never leads to anything good. You should be going directly to the person that hurt you, Matthew 18. But what you do when you slander someone is you spread the evil around. Right? If there was a fire and you're like, hey, I'm going to get some gasoline and throw it on the rug here, that's what you're doing when you're slandering. It always comes back to burn you and the other person, and it's very unloving. And we do it, we call it venting. We have a word for slander that diminishes it. We're venting about someone, right? Your boss has a mom that loves him, and yet you're saying all these vicious things about him. There's no life in it. When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. I'll just say that one of the most powerful things you can do to get your speech life under control and your word count limited is pray. You need God's power. It's a very difficult pattern to break, but you need God's power in that. Conversely, there are times where it's right to speak up and wrong to stay silent, and that might be something that someone who doesn't really have a problem with saying too many words or having a high word count needs to hear. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver, and the heart of the wicked is of very little worth. I'm going to move on. Verse 21, the lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of sense. Again, a somewhat incongruent one, because you would think for fools die because of their, wicked words or wicked lips or something like that. But what it's comparing here is righteous people who feed others with their words, who build them up, and then fools who actually die maybe for a lack of spiritual nourishment, for their lack of sense. Verse 22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich and he adds no sorrow to it. I think this is such a powerful theological thing to understand, is that God is not like us. His love is so much higher, so that he doesn't have less once he gives us something. He still has the same amount. He's got everything. And so for us, though, when we give someone something, we have less. And so there's sometimes this expectation that you've done them a favor, and if they don't respond the right way, then you're going to call in that favor. And that leads to this superstition that when God does something really good, well, something bad must be coming statistically. God doesn't work like that. That's not who God is. All superstition is a lack of understanding of who God is. And in this case, you need to remember that God may bless you in triplets and then again and again, and it doesn't mean anything about how something bad's going to happen. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. And by the way, if you're superstitious, it undermines the praise and thankfulness feedback loop where God gave you something good. Maybe he gave you a promotion and you think, uh-oh, something bad's about to happen. And you're thwarting the praise that he is worthy of in that moment for the good thing he gave you. It's this negative, what's the opposite of pessimist? It's this negative, spiritually pessimistic way of thinking, and it's superstitious, and it's not true. Doing wrong is like a joke to a fool, but wisdom is pleasure to a man of understanding. It's not fun killing off the flesh, but when you get used to it and you watch how that grows your spirit and your connection to the Spirit, it becomes a great joy to you. In the same way, if you continue to do wrong, you become calloused, and it becomes maybe not fun, but it's just meaningless. Doesn't matter. You've seen people like this. What the wicked man dreads will come upon him, but the desire of the righteous will be granted. I talked about the idea of a burdened conscience being a bad omen. What the wicked man dreads will come upon him. Are there things that you have a burdened conscience over? They're like an omen of the future of something bad that's going to happen, and it almost always does. If this is not from the enemy, if this is from the Spirit, you need to relieve that burdened conscience. And things that burden us is unforgiven sin. In other words, you haven't asked for forgiveness. Another one that burdens people that you're not as much of in control of is when someone else hasn't asked for forgiveness for what they've done. The only way is to come together with them. I think a burdened conscience oftentimes is what leads to slandering people too. You're trying to relieve that burdened conscience by deflecting away. They're at fault. And so taking responsibility requires us to think about the idea that actually we're responsible for unburdening our conscience, and God has given us everything we need to do that. So think right now, are you burdened in your conscience? Don't tell yourself, oh, it's not going to come to anything. It won't be a bad thing. It is going to come to something. Those things come to roost, and they're always destructive. So unburden your conscience through confession, through forgiveness, or working through reconciliation, or whatever it is. Make right what you made wrong if it's possible. And it says here, when the tempest passes, the wicked is no more, but the righteous is established forever. I can imagine Jesus reading this and building his proverb of building your house on the rock or building your house on the sand off of wisdom sayings like this. You know, it's just really powerful to remember that when the dust settles, the wicked are gone. And there's so much dust whipping up in America right now. So it's good to know what the future is. Like vinegar to the teeth or smoke to the eyes, so is a sluggard to those who send him. This is one of the reasons why I'm saying laziness is sluggish. It's like an irritant to other people. When they're unreliable, you never can trust whether they're going to do what they're saying they're going to do. So you need to develop a work ethic in your life if you want to actually follow the first and second greatest command. The hope of the righteousness brings joy, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. The only thing I want to highlight about this idea here is that I think there's a theological difference between hope and expectation. Hope is the certainty of things to come. So I believe in the resurrection and I hope in my own resurrection. But I know in my heart, more than I know anything else in my life, that it will actually happen. Because if it didn't, it means God's promise failed, and God never fails. I believe that. God is more trustworthy than my belief in him. It's this unbelievable faith that he's given each one of us that we will be resurrected if you do believe that. And so just remember that and let that sink into your heart in those moments. The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be short. Verse 27. I think I might have skipped over that there. Expectation, let's go back and then back to the first one. Expectations are oftentimes a source of great strife. You had an expectation. It's not a hope in the Lord. God never promised it. You expected this thing to happen, and then when it doesn't, you're upset. So I don't think this just applies to the wicked, but you ought to be careful with your expectations if they're not based on a very explicit promise from the Lord. Expectations can be very unnecessarily disappointing. Back to verse 27, the fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be short. I'm going to say something that might be controversial for you, but I think if you really think it through and listen carefully, you're going to agree. I think that the fear of the Lord says more about how long you're going to live than your diet or health plan. I really believe that. That does not mean that if you fear the Lord, you ought to also not treat your body well. But I don't think that's what he's talking about primarily, that those who fear the Lord are therefore going to live a really healthy life. There's another promise like this for those kids who honor their father and mother, their years will be many. It's the first commandment with a promise, Paul says. So first the 10 commandments with that kind of promise. So I think it's important to remember that a spiritually right relationship with your Creator and Sustainer is the primary thing Scripture talks about leading to a long life. In fact, I can't think of a single verse that says healthy habits lead to a longer life. Is that true? Yes, God has given us a mind, a reason to understand science, and I think it's pretty clear in science, good science, that when you eat a healthier diet, and I know there's a range of views of what the healthiest diet is, but if you eat a healthy diet, it's going to be healthier for you. This is not what I'm disputing. I'm not saying you shouldn't live a healthy life. I'm not trying to diminish your desire to live a healthy life, but I think Christians can become unbalanced where they think it's more important to eat just the right thing, to exercise just the right amount, and fear of the Lord is not as important. So I think your spiritual connection, it makes logical sense that your spiritual right relationship with the Lord would have more to say about your longevity than every single little habit. So much so that I think a person who really fears the Lord but has weaknesses in the area of health will in general live longer than a person who doesn't fear the Lord and has perfect health plans and follows them through. And I think that's important to know. I think we can make an idol out of the works of our own health, and this is kind of where health and wealth gospel gets it from. But really, first fear the Lord, and those other things will fall into place. The hope of the righteous brings joy, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. We just went over that. The way of the Lord is a stronghold to the blameless, but destruction to evildoers. I want to spend almost the rest of our time. We're already out of time. So anything I'm going to say here is on 30, and then I'm just going to read the last ones because there are a lot about speech of righteous and wicked. We spent plenty of time on that. One of the greatest lies in the pulpit today is that God is definitely not angry at you. And this is not some kind of condemning hellfire and brimstone thing I'm about to say, but the reality is that God is definitely at times angry with people. And you will almost never hear this from the pulpit these days. We call it God's wrath. Because God is a God of love, he has wrath stored up for those who child traffic. We're hearing a lot about child trafficking these days because of the movie, The Sound of Freedom. And so would it be loving for God not to be angry about people trafficking children? It would be unloving. Right? If God is a God of love, then there are times where he's angry about things. And yet, because people want to line the pews and bolster their budget, they will lie to people about something that Scripture is very clear about and say, God is not, have you heard that God's angry at you? He's not angry at you. God is love, and it's this lie that has a powerful truth mixed into it. God is steadfast in his love and slow to anger, but slow to anger does not mean he never gets angry. It's such a big lie, and it's a lie that is, I think, so powerfully worked into Christianity these days that people think you're talking about a different God when you talk about God's wrath. Oftentimes. And so I want you to see this, that the way of the Lord is a stronghold to the blameless, but destruction to evildoers. If you just rewrite the sentence in a way that's faithful to its meaning, the way of the Lord is destruction to evildoers. That's what it's saying. It's a stronghold to the blameless, but it's destruction to evildoers. So I want you to consider, what is the way of the Lord in the midst of a bunch of evildoers doing whatever they want in our nation? The way of the Lord is a stronghold to the blameless. When I think about the reason why I've put my kids in private school, and I think highly of homeschooling as well, is it's to keep people away from my children away from the destructive teachings of evildoers. The way of the Lord is against those things, and he will bring that to destruction. So I have stopped praying for the rejuvenation of public schools. I don't call them public schools anymore. I call them government re-education camps, because that's what they are. That is what they are. They are re-educating a whole generation with evil instead of good, and they switch good and evil up. And that's what we're seeing the fruit of these days. And it's always children that are the casualty, because children are seen as a means to an end, whether it's economic or pleasure. Children are seen as a means to an end, and God is against that. His way for those who would see children as a means of pleasure, or and wicked pleasure in this case, or a means to an end economically, is destruction. That's his way. So I want you to consider that idea that it used to be, homeschooling is one way, private school is another, public school is another. Is public school really still a Christian way? You know, our missionaries that we came said, even in Florida, and they gave me permission to say this, and we'll end here. Even in Florida, their son has come back, and he was telling their younger son, their oldest son was telling their second oldest son, it's bad to be white. In Florida, it's bad to be white. I was listening to a YouTube video about the history of slavery by Candace Owens, and it was being watched by 4 black guys, and they were just shocked the whole time. They couldn't believe it. Candace Owens' main 2 points is that slavery is not uniquely white, and the only time it's ever been abolished is by white men. And I would add to that, white Christian men. And I would add to that, white Christian patriarchs. Now, is my point here that white men are better than black men? No, quite the opposite. There is now no longer Greek nor Jew or barbarian or Scythian, or you could say black or white and be faithful, but we're one in Christ. But the solution is not to hammer one race because they've done something wrong. Her point was actually that slavery has been around since the very beginning of time. Egypt, Rome, all the way through. And the only time it's ever been effectively abolished was by Christian patriarchs, and they died to do so in the Civil War. So you see all of these lies. I don't want my children coming home saying it's their, my Isaiah overheard this and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm only half bad." You say, "Oh, but he was joking. He was saying I'm all the way bad." But he sees through it, But if you want to lose your children to ideologies and worldviews that they will hate yours for, keep them in public school, because that's what they're teaching. All of them. None of them are not. That's how you ought to think about it. And I don't think this is a radical statement. They've just crossed my thin red line of teaching perverse things to children. And that ought to be your line too. Again, no one's commanding you to do this. It's still your right to choose whatever school system it is that you want. But it takes sacrifice, I could already have my trailer if I was not paying for private school for my kids. So I just care about the morality more than I care about vacation, So let's read the last couple verses and then close. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut off. It also says before that, the righteous will never be removed, but the wicked will not dwell in the land. We know that we're going to inherit the world when Jesus returns. So this is a solid promise. Verse 32 and final verse, the lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked, what is perverse. We just got done talking about that, actually. So what I want you to do now is, as we come to communion, as Emily comes up and leads us in worship, I want you to consider the ways in which you feel either convicted, encouraged, or challenged in these verses. If you've been talking too much, maybe ask for forgiveness and for self-control. If you've slandered someone, do the very same thing. If you've been lazy, ask God to help you break out of that pattern. These things require forgiveness. They require grace. They require the cross. They require the Holy Spirit transforming your desires, putting to death the false ones, and bringing to life the good ones. Heavenly Father, thank you for this first sermon in Proverbs proper, starting in 10. I pray that you would empower your people to put into practice the things they're learning, which we know is wisdom. I ask that we would be transformed accordingly, and that more than anything, we would remember that love is the key to applying all this wisdom, especially when it comes to wise speech. In Jesus' name, amen.